Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lindsey Koelling, and I am the Healthy Teaching Kitchen Dietitian here at the Columbia VA. So my role is teaching how to cook new foods or maybe some new ways of cooking foods that you're familiar with. So today we're going to be making a meal prep meatball. So this is a way to add some extra vegetables to maybe a common recipe that you might be including, or one that you can modify, one that you have at home to be a little more similar to this, okay? So we're going to start by sauteing some of our vegetables. So unfortunately, here in the Midwest, we don't tend to do a lot of fruits and vegetables. We tend to include meat and what other food group? Potatoes. Yeah. Yes, meat and potatoes. We are a very meat and potato kind of area. That seems to be the biggest parts of our plate. And unfortunately, we miss out on those fruits and vegetables, which have a ton of good benefits from us. So we are going to use a lean ground beef today, and this is a 93.7 ground beef, but I've also mixed in some 99% fat-free ground turkey. Okay, so this is to help lean it out a little bit more and reduce some of that extra saturated fat in it. Okay, so before we do that, we're going to slice up some of our vegetables, cut them up, and lightly saute them just to get them softened a little bit. So we're going to start by cutting our onion. Who's cut an onion before? Oh, yeah, everybody. So much flavor in these. It's a great way to add flavor without adding salt. Okay, it adds a ton of extra flavor. We don't get that extra sodium intake. So when you guys cut an onion, which part do you normally cut? Or how do you cut it? Cut both ends off, cut it in half, both ends. Okay, so we are actually going to cut it a little bit different than that today. And this is going to help keep it together so we don't cut our fingers as easily. Okay, so we're going to use a chef's knife, and part of the reason that we're using a chef's knife is because it's large enough to cut through our onion without having to roll it, which can cause us to maybe cut ourselves a little bit easier. Okay, and then our proper hold on a chef's knife is to have our thumb on one side of the blade, our index finger on the other, and the remaining fingers wrapped around the handle. It's going to feel really awkward the first couple of times you do this, but give it a couple of times. And then after that, holding it back here is going to feel really weird. Okay? So thumb on one side, index finger on the other, wrap your remaining fingers around the handle. So for our onion, we're going to start by actually cutting the stem off. We're going to leave the root attached. So we're just going to make a cut there. And now that we have a nice flat edge, we're going to turn it to cut on that flat edge. This prevents it from rolling around. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and leave the root attached, but we're going to cut halfway down. Okay, so we have nice two big halves. We don't need quite all of this because our recipe only calls for about 1/4 of a cup of diced onion. If you like more onion, add it. Okay, if you like less, you can reduce it. But we're going to dice our onion, meaning that we want a very small kind of size. We don't want a real big one. So we're going to start by taking our palm, putting it on top of our onion, taking our knife, and we're going to make a horizontal cut. Now we're not going to cut all the way back to the root, just partially. Okay? We want it to stay attached. But this is going to give us a smaller dice. If we don't need as small of a dice, we can skip this step. Okay? Then we're going to take our knife and we're going to cut back to that root, not through the root. So it's all going to be attached. So we can still pick it up and kind of move it around. Okay? Then we're going to go back to that first cut that we did, and we're going to take our chef's knife, and we're going to do some small diced pieces. If you want to impress all your friends, they're all evenly the same size, and it makes you look like you took a long time to do it, and it didn't take very long. Okay? So we're going to take about 1/4 of a cup, and we're going to put it in our pan. And we're going to use a little bit of an extra virgin olive oil. Again, for heart health, we're reducing saturated fats. Those are the less heart healthy ones. And we're including more of those mono and polyunsaturated fats. So those are the heart healthier ones. Now, since we're cooking with an olive oil, it has a lower smoke point, meaning that if I turn my heat too high, I'm going to give a really weird smell and flavor that we don't want. So we're going to keep it nice and low and let it simmer a little bit longer. Okay? All right, so that's about all the onion we need. If you like more, throw it in there. All right, we're also going to add some green pepper or bell pepper. If you don't like bell peppers, has anybody ever tried the little mini sweet peppers? Those are a great alternative to these. They're not quite as bitter, but they'll still add some extra nutrition. Okay? So our peppers are full of fiber, both soluble and insoluble fiber. So the little mealy part on the inside of that vegetable is that soluble fiber. The rough outer edge is going to be that insoluble fiber. And soluble fiber helps absorb extra cholesterol and remove it from our bodies. Okay? So that's one of the great benefits of our vegetables and our fruits is that soluble fiber. So on our peppers, we want to make sure that we're cutting and avoiding those seeds and that white membrane in there. And a lot of times I see people take a paring knife and kind of go around that center part. Why could that be a bad idea? You can cut yourself, okay? These skins aren't real tough, and if you have a paring knife that you're going to go around this top part, you have a better chance of cutting yourself, and we don't want to do that. So you kind of saw me do it on that first cut, but I'm going to take my knife, and I'm going to do kind of a crescent moon shaped cut, okay? And by doing that cut, we're going to avoid those seeds in that membrane and get a nice even cut. And then we can turn our pepper, do that next side, turn it again, do it again. And then when we get to that last cut, if it starts to get a little squishy, like it's not going to stand well, you can lay your pepper on its side and cut that last side off. And then we're left with kind of the bottom that we might not want, the seeds that we don't want, and the stem. We can just discard it. Okay? All right, shake those around a little bit, let them cook. So for this one, again, we only need about 1/4 of a cup of diced bell pepper. So we're just going to do some little pieces of this as well. Now, if you don't like diced peppers, or maybe you don't like onions, what else could you use in this recipe? You could use powdered onion, yeah. Garlic, absolutely, that'll add a ton of flavor. Celery, that'd be a great one in it. Another vegetable, I love that. What else? What about mushrooms? What about eggplant? Like a bad... No bad cooks. No. There would be our meat and potatoes, right? That's all right. That's all right. This recipe, you can really modify any of the vegetables that you're including to the ones that you enjoy more or maybe are a little more familiar with. So don't hesitate to add any different kinds. All right, we're also going to add some shredded carrots to this. Shredded carrots hide very well in some foods. So if you're not a big vegetable person or you have a hard time adding them, this can be a great one to throw into pasta sauces, into meatballs or meatloaf, into lasagna. You have a lot of opportunities with it. Do what? Never done it? So these are already shredded, and we could go ahead and add those into this pan if we wanted to. These are still a little bit large for our meatballs, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of roughly chop them so they're a little bit smaller. So whenever you're chopping and you're doing anything with small pieces, I would encourage you to keep the tip of your chef's knife on your cutting board. And then we're just going to roll our knife. This prevents us from kind of having a chopping motion where we could catch a finger. Okay, so we're going to leave that tip of our blade down on that cutting board and just kind of roll our knife. Get it nice and chopped up. And then we're going to put that in our pan as well. And you can start to see all of those colors, how pretty it looks, because we not only eat with our taste buds, but we also eat with our eyes, so we want things to look appealing as well. And then one of my favorite ingredients, spinach. Okay? You get fiber, you get folate, you get iron. It has so much great nutrition to it. A lot of times, if we've had it either canned or already cooked and we don't like the flavor, maybe trying it fresh. Okay? Things have totally different textures depending on how they're cooked or how they're processed. An example of this, has anybody ever had fresh asparagus? Has anybody ever had canned asparagus? Yeah. Big difference, isn't there? Very, very big difference. Texturally, taste-wise, it's a little more bitter. So same thing with spinach. If you don't like it fresh, maybe you'll like it cooked. If you don't like it cooked by itself, maybe you'll like it cooked in something. Okay? So very similar with the carrots that we just did. They're a little larger pieces, so I'm just going to roughly chop them so they're a little bit smaller. They will wilt down a little bit while they're cooking as well. So a nice tip for any kind of leafy thing that you're cutting, so it's not kind of running away on your cutting board again. Works really well with herbs and spices too, is you're going to take it and you're just going to roll it. Okay? So you're going to get it in kind of a nice package, so it kind of holds together. Okay? And we're going to take our knife, again keeping that tip of that blade on our cutting board, and we're going to just chop it up. Okay. Now you might have a few pieces that run away. If you kind of roll those and then re-chop them. And if you want them even finer, you can turn your cutting board and go the opposite direction. Really depends on how fine you want your spinach to be. Some people like larger pieces, other people texturally don't appreciate it as much. So we're just going to stir this and we're going to let this sit and just kind of gently cook until our onions are nice and opaque, our spinach is wilted, our carrots have softened. So we're going to let that sit there for just a second. So while that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and take our ground beef and our turkey mixture, and we're going to add a little bit of seasoning to this. But we're not going to add salt. So we're going to add flavor in other ways. So the thing with meatballs is we want them to stay together, right? Anybody ever had a meatball that they made and just kind of bloop? It's kind of a sad meatball. We don't want that, okay? So we're going to add a little bit of a whole wheat flour. Again, whole grains. We want to make sure we're getting those good B vitamins, that fiber that's going to be found in our whole grain. If you don't want to use a flour in this recipe, you could replace it with milled flaxseed. Okay, you're going to get some omega-3s from those as well, and a good replacement for the flour. It'll help to bind your meatballs together too. Okay. Then we're going to add some garlic powder, and to this we're going to add 1 teaspoon of our garlic powder. And notice I said powder and not salt. So be careful whenever you're grocery shopping, because a garlic powder and a garlic salt are set right next to each other, and they look almost identical. Okay? And then we're going to add a teaspoon of our Italian seasoning and a little bit of pepper to taste. The recipe does say you can add a little bit of salt if you want to. Just a reminder, the recommendation for salt is 2,300 milligrams or less per day. Any idea what that looks like? It's a teaspoon. You're exactly right. A teaspoon right there for an entire day. So think about how much we might be putting in some of our recipes and the difference for what an entire day should look like. Now, if you have any cardiovascular issues, maybe you're on a lower sodium diet, and maybe your doctor's recommending you're at 1,500 milligrams or less, that's going to be less than a teaspoon, okay? So keep that in mind whenever you're thinking about some of your recipes. All right. So this looks about done. We're going to go ahead and mix this into our meatball mixture as well. This is a great recipe if you have kids or grandkids that like to help you cook. Because if you let this cool for just a little bit, they can take their fingers and just squish it all together. Okay? So we're just going to take our spoon and start to mix it up. Get it nice and mixed well. And then we're going to form them into just little meatballs. Now this recipe will make about 20 meatballs, and a serving is 4. Okay, so you got about 5 servings out of it. Now if you're only cooking for 1 or 2, or maybe you want it for a few different meals, they do freeze well. So just portion them into 1 serving little packages or bags, freezer bags, and stick them in your freezer and save them for later. Okay. Now, I'm going to do the magic of TV real quick. I had some baking while we were preparing these. So, close your eyes for just a second, and they'll be ready. Now, anytime we use any kind of raw meat, we want to make sure that we're not cross-contaminating anything that's already cooked with any of our raw products. So I want to make sure that none of my raw meat touches anything that's coming out of the oven. And we also want to make sure that our meatballs cook to the correct temperature. Okay? So if you choose to use just a ground beef, they only need to be cooked to about 155 degrees. Okay? Since we added some ground turkey into them, the recommendation for any ground poultry or any ground chicken, ground turkey is 165. Okay, so we want our temperature to read 165. These are just little inexpensive digital thermometers. So look how cute those look. All the veggies you can see in them. And our temperature is 168 and still climbing. Now, anytime you take a temperature of any food, excuse me, you want to make sure that you check more than one spot. Because our ovens might cook a little unevenly. Or maybe I made one of our meatballs just a little bit larger than one of the others and it's not cooking quite as much. Okay, so that one's at 180. And this one's at 167 and still going. And 175 and still going. Okay, so you can kind of see that there was different temperature ranges just within the ones that I checked. So they are done. Okay, so difficult to do? No. What can we pair with this to make this a complete meal? A potato. Maybe we're doing a sweet potato. We're getting a little more vitamin A in there. I love it. What else could we pair with it? Pasta. Or maybe we're doing a spaghetti squash or zucchini noodles. Okay, or whole wheat noodles. Quinoa. Okay, maybe we're adding it to a nice big salad that we've made. Okay, maybe we have a whole wheat tortilla that we're putting it in and adding some other veggies to it to make it more of a complete meal. So this is just kind of a base starter for you to build the rest of your plate, but you'll notice that most of the stuff that we're talking about is either a whole grain or another type of vegetable that we're adding to it. Okay, so make sure we're really trying to include those into our diet. Reduce our saturated fat intake, reduce our salt intake, and increase our fruits and vegetables. Any questions? Yes?
When you said freeze them,
Uh-huh.
you're freezing them raw or freezing them cooked?
You can freeze them either way, depending on how you want to do it later. If you freeze them raw, I would encourage you to let them thaw before you bake them to make sure the centers are baked fully. Otherwise, if you pre-cook them, go ahead and let them cool down for just a little bit before you put them in your freezer to freeze them. To prevent them from sticking together, once they are cooled down on your pan, stick your pan in the freezer so they freeze individually, and then you can put them in a bag a little bit easier. But don't let them sit out for more than 2 hours. That's your time limit for food safety. Okay. Other questions?
Can we try them?
Absolutely, that's the best part, right? Yes, of course we can try them.